So like Tyler said, we're going to talk about what's new with Auros IQ. So we're going to go through a number of different features, not only that have been introduced to the product over the past year, but things that we're planning for the future, things that maybe happened a little bit before the past year, but we're building upon them. So we'll talk a lot about that. Obviously, there'll be questions at the end. We'll show some screenshots, some mock-ups for things in the future. We'll do a little bit of a demonstration in the middle of the presentation. But we want to start off with the objectives of the product. What is it that we're trying to achieve, the things that we kind of keep in mind with every change that we make? So obviously, Steve talked about artificial intelligence. We want to find ways that we can use artificial intelligence, not necessarily to make engineering decisions, but to help support and facilitate those things. We want to create an intuitive user experience. We've received feedback in the past that people struggle to find different things or navigate the system. We want to make sure that when we're making changes, we're using the things that we know and the expertise that we have internally to create an intuitive user experience within the product and within the features that exist. We want to try to reduce complexity where applicable. So if we have 6 or 7 different ways to solve the same problem, if we can reduce that, maintain the robustness, but reduce the complexity, it can help promote consistent use of the software, a consistent user experience, things that are more intuitive, those kinds of things. So we'll now start to talk a little bit about the features that have been introduced over the past year or so. We introduced something that was presented last year at the conference called My Dashboard. So we'll talk a little bit about where that's gone since it's been implemented, where it's going. We also have introduced something called the Create Assessment Wizard. Same thing, we'll talk about the introduction to that, the benefits that some people have gotten. You saw some screenshots of it in Scott's presentation. The assessment knowledge model. So this is one that has recently been introduced. We'll talk a little bit about what that is and how it facilitates modeling of knowledge and communicating things back up and down that hierarchy that we talked about with the product development process, engineering process execution, those kinds of things. We've got a feature called copy line items that the name probably doesn't do it justice, but we'll talk a little bit and I'll actually demonstrate how this works. And it facilitates a problem that a lot of our customers had that was preventing their ability to use the software in an efficient way. And we introduced this feature and it seems very rudimentary, but when you actually apply it within the context of this challenge that people were having, it's been extremely valuable for groups. Assessment due dates are things that we're looking to include in the next release. We also have some additional functional software features around assessment types, so we'll talk a little bit about those. And then we want to be able to integrate our knowledge processing engine into the conformance palette, so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like as well. So let's start with My Dashboard. What is My Dashboard? It's a central location to access items that you need to take action on. So we received feedback from users in the past that they have a number of different things that they need to complete in Auros, and they navigate from one community to the next, and they have to find these things through manual searches. Well, we wanted to create a central location where all the items that you need to take action on are going to be collected for you based on your role, your association with different assets. So role and status are the two things that go into how things show up on your dashboard. So for instance, if you're an evaluator and an assessment is in evaluation ready, that assessment is going to show up on your dashboard. If you are an assignee of an issue and that issue is not closed, the issue is going to show up on your dashboard. This year, we introduced assessments as approver. So if you're an approver on an assessment and your assessment is in approval ready status, that assessment is now going to show up on your dashboard. So we're starting to expand the functionality so that as a user, the system recognizes what your role is in relationship to these different assets, understands the status associated with those assets, and then brings those to you in a central location so that you no longer have to go find the things that are associated with you necessarily. So some of the things that we're looking to include in the dashboard here moving forward, this isn't an extensive list, but it is the things that are kind of next in the pipeline, would be KPACs as approver, so similar to the assessments as approver. If you have a knowledge packet, you're an approver on it, it's in approval ready, that would then show up on your dashboard. And then we have assessments as creator that are in build in process. So we have a lot of groups that will create an assessment. The creator, the person who's initiating the work, has some preparation that they need to do prior to sending it to whoever's going to complete the work. So if you're the creator of an assessment and it's in build in process status, that's one of the things that we're considering adding to the dashboard as well. So this is a screenshot of the dashboard. You see some information on here. We'll get to the due date feature and talk about how that integrates in. But right now in the product, this is a list of assessments where the user who's logged in is the evaluator and they're in evaluation ready status. So it's going to tell you what community it comes from. It's going to tell you the type of assessment that it is, the project it's on. We've got something called a dot path, if you're not familiar, that allows the different communities to configure what information is important to them. That information goes into this column that says assessment. So we've got one normalized user experience, but we have that flexibility so that the different processes, the different communities can configure what's important to them, and that information can all show up in one spot. And then some metric information on the assessments. We'll get into some of the improvements to this page that are coming with association to the due date. But right now in the product, if you have the dashboard in production, you'll see the number of line items that exist in the assessment, how many of those are considered complete, and then you've got the pie chart that gives you the conformance states associated with it. So the next feature is the assessment wizard. So when we started looking at the ways that you can create assessments, we found that we had a number of different ways that people were doing that. It was leading to some difficulty for users to create assessments across communities, across processes, because they were happening in different ways. So we wanted to create a consistent and intuitive and robust mechanism to create assessments that would be able to allow all of our communities to maintain this robustness, right? Address their particular needs, but also have a consistent user experience. So we wanted it to reflect and promote the dependencies that exist within the communities of practice and within the software. It's going to allow us now to ensure data integrity across communities, across assessments. It can also facilitate process automation. So we introduced that and we started to expand it here over the last year. It started off as a function on my dashboard so that we didn't put it in places where people had established processes. We needed a spot where we could kind of start, refine it over time, and then start to migrate it across the system. We then introduced it to something called the COP homepage. If you're not familiar with this, is a feature that was released last year as well. It's kind of the central location for process architects or community of practice administrators to see what's happening within their process, within their community. So the wizard was then integrated into that homepage. We recently integrated it into method steps. So now when you're creating from a method step, whether you're creating from your dashboard or creating from the homepage, the experience is going to be consistent every time you create. We also introduced it to the assessment knowledge model, and we're in the works of introducing it into assessment types so that when you select your type, you start to get some of these wizard configurations that show up. And we also expanded the wizard to deliver knowledge packets by set as opposed to just manual filter criteria selection. So if you haven't seen the Create Assessment Wizard, this is what it looks like. The steps of the process are listed on the left-hand side in order of their dependencies. So when you select your community of practice and your project, that's going to define the types that are available for you to pick. Once you select your assessment type, we can then define the elements that are applicable. We'll talk a little bit about that here when we get to the assessment type configurations. Roles may be automated. If you know this type of assessment goes to this person on the project and we have that data footprint in Auros, you can automatically start assigning roles. And then the selection of the knowledge packet, so the delivery. If we're setting all of our context through the community of practice, the project, the assessment type, and then the elements associated with it, ideally we're able to deliver the knowledge automatically. We don't have to have people select the knowledge packets that apply to their project. We can take the context and we can automatically deliver the knowledge to them. So we'll talk a little bit about how that works when we get into the demonstration. We'll show how some of this automation works. Some of the automation's in the demo, some of it is not, just to show that there's the ability to use this even if you don't have all these things defined and automated. All right, the assessment knowledge model. So the general problem that we were solving here is very related to engineering process execution. Specifically in the product development process, we had a number of different groups that were trying to onboard their PDP, right? They're trying to get that into Auros, and there were two challenges that they were facing when trying to do that. One of them was they have their list of deliverables. So we've got a timing event. We have 10, 15, 20 different things that need to be completed by that timing event. And then the evidence that they're completed was actually an assessment in a different community. So you've got your product development community, But then you also have design analysis plan or design review, right? Those things are happening in other communities, and the connection between the two could be made, but it was manual. A lot of times you're in the product development community, you have to leave, go to the design review community, create your design review, then come back to your product development community and like manually attach it or hashtag it, and we'll show what that looks like as well. But we wanted to be able to facilitate that activity, promote the representative data hierarchy. So when things are children of other things, we wanted the system to be able to understand that, to facilitate things like reporting and visualization of data. It also can facilitate communication across individuals. So like I talked about, if you're the if you're the program manager and you're managing this list of deliverables, the program engineer might be doing the work over here, but the communication of that is in email, it's verbal. We wanted to be able to facilitate it directly within the system and make it more efficient so that we didn't have to exit the system and do these things manually. That also allows us to enable real-time reporting. And then if you look at the knowledge model, and we'll demonstrate a little bit of this as well, we've got our line item. Instead of having a value table or having a method that is associated with the completion of that line, we now can have an assessment that is built in a different community. It can be built in the same community that you're in, but it is the evidence and it can start to facilitate the work. So in a lot of scenarios, we see groups that have checklists. They're completing those checklists, but the work that's actually being done is somewhere else. And there's a lot of manual effort in communicating those things back and forth. This knowledge model is going to allow us to facilitate the communication that the work needs to get done, complete the work, and then automatically report it back up. So this will be part of the demonstration as well, but this is a screenshot of how that knowledge model is integrated into the line item. The next feature is the copy line items feature. So I talked a little bit about this one. When you're onboarding a product development process, we have a lot of groups that will start at a timing event. Maybe you've got 10 things that need to be completed. Most groups have far more than 10, but I'll just use 10 as the example. 10 things need to be completed at milestone 1. When you go to milestone 2, 6 of those things need to continue to be worked on and matured. 4 of those things drop off, but then you've got another 12 that need to be added to the 6. So this transition from one timing event to the next was something that our groups struggled with. They're either creating a new assessment, manually transferring information over, they're copying the original assessment, manually changing the contents of it so that they don't have to copy information over. So we wanted to try and find a solution to reduce that manual effort and make things more automated, and copy line items is kind of what we came up with. So transition between activities or timing events. It's going to preserve the data footprint of the initial activity. It's going to reduce the manual effort in initiating or kicking off the second activity. And what that looks like here, it's integrated into the wizard. I'll show a demonstration. It'll be manual. I'll be typing numbers in, but we will be able to automate these things so you can automatically pull the data and you don't have to manually transfer it. But this is going to allow us to say anything that carries over from my first timing event to my second one, transfer all that data for me. All right, so we're going to start here. So I'm going to demonstrate the 3 features that I just finished talking about. So if you're familiar with our methods, we have the ability, here we go. So we'll start off with our first timing event, right? We go through, we complete all the information that's in it. We've got our 7 deliverables. We've got information that happened, and now we need to transition from milestone 1 to milestone 2. So the first aspect of this is we have things that have happened here that need to go over. We have some things that are part of milestone 1 that don't apply to milestone 2. And then we also have new items that need to be accounted for in milestone 2 moving forward. So we close out milestone 1, we do the review, we get everything approved, the right people sign off, and we need to preserve this record, but then we need to initiate milestone 2, and we want to do that in an efficient way. So we've got this particular milestone review. I'm now going to kick off the process. You're going to see the wizard here, so you'll see that the community of practice and the project are automatically being populated. So you can manually make these selections, but if you know the context and it already is coming from that parent that I just clicked the Create New button from, we can automate some of that selection. Again, because I'm going from the milestone review step, the system knows that that's happening, so it's pre-populating this information. Now, it could know that I'm coming from milestone 2. The demonstration has me manually selecting this value just to show that if you don't have the context, you can allow users to make the selection within the flow, and it's going to build upon what they've selected previously. So again, the roles here, I'm going to assign Michaela as our evaluator. We can take all that context and it can automate the selection of knowledge packets. So here it's not automated, but we could say we know we need the deliverables for milestone 2 because that context exists above in the wizard. So as we start to build all this information, we get to these steps where the context that's been put in previously can be used, and we have the ability now to automate these selections. So here's the copy line item feature. We're at milestone 2. We want to be able to automate that you can pull the information from the first one. Here I'm going to manually type it in. So I'm just pulling that ID. I say I want to copy information from here. So you can see that we've got 7 line items from that first milestone assessment. There's going to be some that carry over, some that don't. But the system now knows that anything that's similar between the 2 milestones, I want to carry over all the information into the next assessment. So now we had 7 line items in the first one. They were all filled out. These 4 are common. So all the information was carried over into this new assessment. And then because I said I need the deliverables for milestone 2, not the deliverables for milestone 1, it's not replicating the first assessment. It's only carrying over the information that's consistent from one to the next. But it also adds the items that are applicable to milestone 2 that didn't apply to milestone 1. So this kind of seems fairly straightforward, and it is straightforward, but this unlocked a lot of potential for groups that had assessments maybe that have 45, 50 line items in them, and 30 of those things carry over. Now they don't have to manually copy information. They don't have to copy the assessment, manually take the other 20 things out, and manually add their 15 things that are new for the new milestone. It allows us to go through this process. We had to manually put some data in, but as we start to automate and put the automation features in, we'll be able to click that blue button, and it'll essentially bring us our assessment that just starts the second timing event. All right, the next feature that we're going to demonstrate here is that assessment knowledge model. So we talked about, we have something like a design review. In Auros, prior to this feature, you have the ability to leave your product development and your milestone review, go over, create your design review assessment, and then come back and what we call hashtag it into the explanation field. You could upload a link to this assessment to the line item. So you have the ability to connect them, but it's not programmatically being done. And when something updates in the child or in the design review assessment, we're not automatically setting that conformance and reporting back up the chain. With the assessment knowledge model, we now have the ability to do that. So the same way that I just created from the step, we can now create from a line item. I'm not going to walk through this entire process because it'll open something that's blank. But essentially the same way I just walked through the wizard, you can do that here as well. You can automate these selections. You know that the design review for milestone 2 is what I'm doing, and it can automatically bring the knowledge that you need as opposed to having to leave, manually make those selections, and then come back here and attach it. So I'm going to go to an assessment that I have pre-populated. So here, we walk through that process, assign an evaluator, that evaluator gets a notification. They start to do their work, and that work is all reflected in the child assessment, and it's automatically reported back up to the higher level line item. So now we're not manually leaving the place where we were doing our work, initiating work, and then coming back and manually attaching it to the line. We're actually facilitating the work from the line item. It sends the communication out automatically. The act of creating is automatically going to put it on the line item, and then any work that happens here at the lower level is automatically communicated back up. So that's where we've got this completion bar, we've got our high-level output state. We still have the ability to access the assessment if we want to, but it's going to be able to now drive this conformance. And if you think back to that product development process where we had all these layers of hierarchy, we now have this feature that's going to allow us to link multiple layers together. As work happens down here, it automatically can make its way from a reporting perspective all the way up to the top of the process. All right, a couple other features that we wanted to talk about. The assessment due date. So this is one that we've had multiple customers asking for quite a bit. And we went to implement this. We wanted to be able to give an indication of expected timing. So we can put dates on headers right now, but when we start to then try to report across communities and across these different work items, it's difficult to understand, like, well, which one is the one that's indicating when I'm supposed to be done? If you have 5 or 6 different dates on a header, which one's applicable to me? So we wanted to be able to give communities and process architects the ability to indicate the expected timing in an efficient way that was going to be consistent across assessments. So we wanted that to be intuitive. We wanted people to be able to know exactly when something is due. We want to facilitate the automated real-time reporting. So things like understanding how to see the 10 or 12 different deliverables within the context of a timeline. If we know the due dates, and those are all on each individual assessment, we can easily produce that view. So as we start to introduce this feature, it's going to allow us to indicate on an individual assessment when that thing is due. And then it's also going to allow us to facilitate this real-time reporting. How many things do we have overdue? How many things are coming up? If I want to visualize in like a Gantt chart, we can easily visualize in a Gantt chart because we know which date on the header is the one to plot the assessment. So we don't have this in the product yet. We have some mock-ups for it. This is the mock-up, and this will be included in the release that comes out here shortly. But the due date is visualized here on the masthead. There are a lot of other places where it needs to be put. The header of an assessment, hover cards of an assessment. It needs to show up in the dashboard. It needs to show up on the COP homepage. So all those things will have a consistent visual indicator, and this is just the visualization of what that looks like. Then assessment types. Like I talked about, we want to be able to give process architects a mechanism to configure assessment behavior within a community. So we talked a little bit earlier about Susan and the 350 communities that she's managing. Some of those may be because we need different behavior for the assessments, but there's a lot of administration across those communities that doesn't need to be different. So when something's changed in one community, if you've got 10, you have to go make that same change in 10 places. We wanted to allow that configuration of the assessment behavior to happen within a community of practice so that we didn't require individuals to create 10, 20, 15, or 30 communities in order to facilitate just assessment behavior when like all their KPAC details are the same or other features are the same. So it's going to reduce that administrative overhead. It can ensure data integrity. So if we have behavior that needs to happen one way with one assessment and a different way with a different assessment, we're able to program that or configure that into the system. It can facilitate process automation as well. So I clicked through that wizard from a method step. Well, at the type level, if I know that I'm creating a process assessment, or if I know I'm creating standard work, or I know I'm creating a design review assessment, the way that those things should function can be dependent on that type selection. What elements are applicable, what elements are required, what is the dot path, so what is the important information. Sometimes the important information for a process is different than the important information for the standard work that completes that process. The wizard configurations, like I talked about, automating creation steps, and then assessment approvals. A lot of times we'll have groups where they're doing approvals at all the different steps throughout the process. They don't necessarily need an approval at that parent level or on the entire process itself because the approval happens as they go. So being able to configure approvals, whether they're on or off, who needs to approve at which point, per assessment type is something that we plan to put in the product here in the next release. And then the last thing, which is not planned for the next release, but it is on a short list of items, is the integration of our knowledge processing engine. So we've received a lot of feedback from users that obviously the knowledge models are valuable. Instead of having people read through text and then manually say whether red or green, we can create these models that produce a consistent, robust outcome, right? So we can ensure data integrity through integrating those knowledge models into the conformance palette. A lot of times we'll have groups that have value tables or they have methods, and instead of filling out the value table, users see the green, the pass-fail buttons, and they just click the pass button because they've read the knowledge packet. If we can integrate that knowledge processing engine into the conformance palette, it'll help us avoid some of those scenarios. facilitate process automation through the value table, the assessment knowledge model, or the method. And we've got a screenshot of what that could look like. Like I said, this isn't in the product yet, but you can kind of see on the left-hand side there, we've got a conformance palette at the top where there is no knowledge model. If you have a value table, instead of getting the conformance palette, you get the evaluate button. If you have a method or an assessment, you would get the method or the assessment button. This doesn't show the hybrid of those things. Maybe you have a value table that puts pass fail, that will set the pass or fail, but you need users to be able to manually say not applicable. Those kinds of scenarios will be facilitated. This is just a simplified screenshot of what it could look like. Any questions?
Hey, Josh?
Yes, sir.
Well, when looking at the carry forward aspect,
Yeah.
if I have in my original assessment 3 occurrences of a KPAC, and I'm copying forward that KPAC,
Right.
how does it handle those 3 occurrences?
The first occurrence is the one that gets carried over right now. Yeah, because the other occurrences don't exist in the new assessment, right? Because when you create, you don't have multiple occurrences. That is one of the things, though, that's kind of on the roadmap for the carry forward, is right now you're putting in the ID and it's carrying over conformance state, explanation, attachments, the knowledge model detail, and there's one other thing that I can't remember off the top of my head. But being able in the issues, thank you. Being able to kind of configure things like, what do you want to carry over? Do you need occurrences? That kind of stuff makes sense to be in the flow. It just wasn't part of the initial feature.
Okay, thank you.
Hello.
Hello?
So to the dashboard, I have a couple questions. You didn't have anything about issue as a approver for an issue.
Yeah, that's another thing that's on the list. It just
Okay.
wasn't like the things that are the next things that we have planned right now. But
Okay.
things like issue as approver, there's a number of different assets with different roles that make sense to go to the dashboard. They just weren't listed here.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. And then one of the things that I've noticed is that there is no report for an issue approver. Like, I have a ton of issues that I need to get approved, and I don't know what approver it's sitting with. Do you have anything, because you guys have reports for everything except for
Sure.
that. So is there any plan to actually pull out like whose box, like if I use a level 1, 2, 3, it might
Yeah.
be the level 1 approver has approved it, but 2 and 3, they're sitting with them, and one of them is approved, but one hasn't. The only way I can do it is pull the list of issues,
Yeah, maybe,
open up
yeah.
each one of them, write down the person, so then I can go hound them.
Yeah, I mean, right now in the plan of things that are headed down the pipeline, like we don't have something for that. There may be some solutions today that we would be able to like pull information. I'm not exactly sure. We can take a look at it,
Okay.
but it's certainly something we'd be interested in talking
And I'm just wondering if anybody else has this issue, maybe. Okay, we got one. Okay.
Yeah.
And then one of the things that we've been talking about for years
Mm-hmm.
is the pull through. And let me ask this because I want to get the opinion since this is a good audience here.
Yeah.
And you've talked about it. So we have this issue where we have, I'm going to call it a home COP. It's where all of my knowledge lives. And let's call it, I'm in seats, so I'm just going to call it seats. And then I have, I pull information from other COPs into my seats homepage, or COP, my home COP. And then I'd go do an assessment over in another COP that's called not seats. So when I pull those KPACs from seats, from my set from seats, over into not seats, all of my attribute data is missing.
Sure.
So I can't communicate to the user who is supposed to be completing it, or all the, we are so attribute heavy in ours, it's ridiculous. But anyways, all of that information is gone. Mm-hmm. So does anyone else have this kind of issue? Because we think it might be unique to us, but just if anybody's ever experienced that, or you could look at me like I'm crazy too, that's totally fine. But it's when you use 2 different COPs basically to do your things and pull data in from other aspects.
Yeah, To my knowledge, I'm not familiar, or I'm not aware of
I know,
people who are
we've
doing
talked
the same
about this
thing.
one, yeah.
Yeah. I don't
Nobody?
know if anyone
Boy,
else is
I
doing
was
it.
hoping I'd get at least one hand up. No, it's because it's only owned in seats, and when you pull it into seats, when you pull, so like, if I pull I'll call it MR, if I pull an MR into my space, it's gonna have all my attributes that I set for seats. But as soon as I pull that pulled in KPAC into another one, it's no longer associated. So we call it like pull through, because I'm pulling into, but then pulling through.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing. I'll find you afterwards, and we can talk a little bit about it and see what we can do.
And I think that's it. I can probably
Yeah.
talk to you offline for other
Yeah,
things.
no worries. Any other questions?
Josh, we have a question from the app.
Yeah.
What kind of reporting will the assessment due date enable?
So it's a good question. There's going to be a number of different things that it'll enable, right? We can, like I said, we could be able to automatically produce Gantt reports. We could automatically be able to produce completion reports. So on this program, we've got 100 different assessments and 25 of them are overdue, right? That kind of stuff will now be possible because the dates aren't just a field capturing a date on the header anymore. It actually has this idea of the status of the date. This is when it's supposed to be complete. If the assessment's still evaluation ready and that date is in the past, then it's overdue. So that kind of reporting will be automatic. We'll be able to facilitate it being automatic. It won't be part of the first cut of the feature. And then the other things like the dashboard, the COP homepage, having that information available in those places as just a product of the assessment being created and the field being filled out is all going to be facilitated through the assessment due date as well.
All right, thank you.
Right on. Thank you.